I just have to say a word of thanks to not just classmate, but also my sorority sister at Duke. I just, you all know how wonderful she is, and she's been wonderfulness all over me, just making this really easy to have a transition. I got to invite my friends who are here with me today, and so I'm really looking forward to speaking a second, and just getting to be with you all. It's a privilege.
Nancy, are you able to turn on the mic? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, it's
I'm sorry.
I should know better. You have to wear pants, so you have to wear a skirt.
Okay, good.
Okay. So those Olympic symbols are some valuable marks in the world. They carry with them a certain cachet of meaning hard work, of meaning symbolizing what the best of humanity has to offer. They are the third most recognizable symbol in the world, right next to the crucifix and the swastika. So those three in the whole world are the most well-known marks, and they are very, very valuable. Just to get, it's called a top sponsor for the IOC, just to activate, just to be able to get there, it's $100 million. That's before you buy the first T-shirt that has to make the first commercial. The United States Olympic Committee in 2016 made $425 million. These are very valuable marks. And they're not just valuable that way, but what they're able to inspire. I know that everybody in here knows that Olympic athletes work very hard, right? You all know that. But just put it down on a level that we can all relate to. So if you take a look at this room and maybe add another, say, 10 meters onto it or yards onto it, your average high school size pool, you guys have all seen that size. So in swimming, if you're a really good swimmer, it's about this fast. Okay? So how many laps a day do you think you'd have to swim to be the best in the world? 1, 2. Right? How many laps? Just think of a number in your head. 10 million. 10 million. Okay.
You probably got 20 million.
Your average audience usually starts around 50. So 50 is not normal. 50 isn't, you're not really ready to go in practice. The number is 800. So from 7th grade until I graduated from high school, I was up at 4:45 in the morning. We swam from 5:30 to 7:30. My school went from 8 to 4 in the afternoon. We had 2 PE periods during school, and during that time, I either lifted weights or ran on alternate days. And then we had 2 to 2.5 more hours after school. So this isn't something one gets into lightly. This isn't, but it was the call of those 5 rings that made me stay in it, that captured my imagination, that made me think I wanted to be the best in the world. I wanted to see what was humanly possible. I knew I was very gifted, and I want to see how far could I really take this. When swimming feels good, not all the time, but when swimming feels good, I just heard somebody laugh, and I know they're an athlete. It feels like swimming's doing you. You feel graced by God. It is the most amazing feeling of beauty and mastery and grace. It feels like completely effortless, and it just is great. So when it's going well, like that is what you're going for, and it's those moments that kind of keep you in when it feels like you're like an elephant. It feels like weights are on your body and trying to swim. So the hold that those 5 rings have over people and what it can inspire them to do is amazing. If it had not been for those rings, I doubt very seriously that I ever would have worked as hard in swimming but it was the call of those games that made it so important to me. Which is why so much of my work as a civil rights lawyer has been about making sure that experience that people have is a good one. Okay? So making sure that women have equal opportunities, making sure that their sports experience is equal to the sports experience that the men get. Okay? Now, it's a statute that in some ways is crazy easy. I'm trying to get some really good lawyers here to get into this work because it's whatever they give the boys, they have to give the girls. Okay? So if somebody lives in a poor or rural area, they don't offer very many sports, Title IX is not very effective. But here in places like Boston, here in places like the Northeast, you all offer a ton of sports opportunities, which means Title IX is that much more powerful. It can do so much more for people. Not only is it important that people have the opportunity, but it's also important that they have the safety. I got into working with Title IX, and very quickly in my professional career, the statute went from mostly athletics over here to all of a sudden, when people heard Title IX, they were thinking sexual assault, sexual violence of what was happening on campus. And so my work moved over into this area, and I got to work with the University of Colorado for 5 years. You may remember, we're going to talk about it a little later in my talk, Lisa Simpson was raped by football recruits in 2001, and the parties, after they lost at the appellate court, the parties settled, plaintiffs and defense lawyers settled on me to come in and work with the school for 5 years. So I got to see that there's like a playbook, right? I got to work with some of the best people in the business and how it is that schools are supposed to be taking care of their students who experience sexual violence. And what can we do to make sure that sexual violence doesn't stop somebody's trajectory from growing up? So then around 2010, I started getting the same kind of calls that I was getting when it came to sexual violence on campuses, except instead of on campus, this sexual violence happened in sport, in the club movement, in sports that were not associated with schools, okay? So I'm gonna ask you a question. How many of you all, or either you or a family member, participated in the Olympic movement? Raise your hand. Okay, now, so you don't understand what the Olympic movement is because every hand pretty much should be going up if you ever played a sport that was not associated with school. The club system, like when you go down the street here and you sign your kid up for soccer, that's part of the Olympic movement. When you go to take your ice skating lessons, right, that's all part of, right? So you have the United States Olympic Committee, and then there are 50 national governing bodies that sit underneath that govern each sport, right? So you have the United States swimming, United States track and field, and taekwondo, and fencing, and right, all the different sports are under there. So most of you, it's about 16 million athletes are in the Olympic movement, and this is a upper class group. So I would expect that. So now let me ask you, how many of you or your family member part of the Olympic movement? Yeah, right. But here's what's crazy: you all didn't know that. You're part of those 5 rings. You did not know that. So we're going to talk about sexual abuse. It's a very yucky topic, and what I need you to do is, if I post something on Facebook about sexual abuse, first 3 comments are almost always the same. They are, number 1, kill him. Number 2, chop off his testicles. Number 3, put him in prison for life. Okay? None of those things are really going to happen. Larry Nassar is an outlier. For anybody who gets sent to prison for life is an outlier. That's unusual. And so it makes people feel better, but they're coming from an emotional part of their brain that doesn't actually change the circumstance for the athlete who's on the ground, right? Who just signed up for the swimming program that's right down the street, right? So I need you to move from that like, part of your brain to the like, part of your brain. Okay? All right. I'm going to tell you the story of how we got this statute passed. Okay, so last year we got a statute that does things, and did you all hear about this statute that we got passed? I would guess that you didn't, and the reason why you probably didn't is because most of you thought that all the provisions already applied. Okay? So it's things like mandatory reporting, it's things like the United States Olympic Committee owes illegal athletes, that it serves, all these things, right, that, you would think, well, I mean, schools already have this, all these other groups, why? Well, of course, but not so fast. All right, so this is starting from 2010 to now, 2019. We're still in the middle of it. All right, I'm going to talk about what are some unique factors that make sexual abuse so much more likely in athletics. One is the unique power that a coach has over an athlete. There's no way an athlete can get where they want to go without a coach, without a good coach. Without somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows how to move the human body, who knows how to I didn't really rely, frankly, on coaches to motivate, but I did rely on their energy of complete integrity and working hard and being focused on what was happening here. But yeah, and for me, this is not for everybody, but I needed a team. I needed other people who were doing the same thing I was, so that I could kind of rely on them on those days that I did not want to get into the water with every cell in my body, right? But, you're part of a big group, and so you go and get in the water. So the authority that coaches have really cannot be overestimated. I would say that the authority that the parolees had over the gymnasts is just wildly extraordinary. You were not in their good graces. You were not going to make that Olympic team. Those 5 rings were not going to be yours. So they had to be obedient and compliant in order to be able to get those things. Okay? The International Olympic Committee did research in 2007 showing that the more elite the athlete, the more likely they were to be abused from somebody within their own entourage. Okay? So it's within that group, right? So you would think that somebody who would gain authority and they're famous and they would have more power. They don't. Okay? So then 2 is just the amount of time that coaches spend with athletes. Easy 40, 50 hours a week that they're spending with the athletes in ways that teachers and other adults in a child's life, a religious figure or whatever, they don't spend anywhere near as much time as a coach will spend with an athlete. Then the physical nature of sports, meaning, there's they grabbing your arm and stretching and helping with weights and spotting, and right, there's an emphasis on the body. There's an appropriate focus on the athlete's body. So my coach needed to talk to me about, how are your abs? And sometimes, if I felt like something, right, he would do you see herniated or what's happening here? And, what's going on with your hip or, shoulder, right? Had to let him listen to it click. And there's an appropriate focus on the body. You can see that all those things combined really set up an athlete uniquely for being set up for sexual abuse in a way that other things don't necessarily have. Okay? Okay, so now let's talk about how do we protect people, everybody in society, from sexual abuse. Okay? So number 1, we protect children. So all youth-serving organizations have all these rules about you got to be with somebody else, you got to have a rule-free, and they recognize that this is a danger. Any youth-serving organization, the Olympic Committee and different national governing bodies would not see themselves as dealing with children. They saw themselves as dealing with athletes. So I was number 1 in the world, as you heard, at age 14. They did not look at me as a 14-year-old. I was an athlete, and I was expected to be, as every adult would be, and that was the norm of. Okay, so children. 2 is you protect people. We protect people who are in subordinate positions. Remember, I was talking about how much authority that a coach has over an athlete. So we do it in a number of ways. There's civil rights ways. We've got Title VII in employment. We've got Title IX in education. We've got special statutes related to prison guards, right? We have We have all kinds of statutes that protect people who are in those subordinate positions, right? So somebody like Harvey Weinstein, how can you sue him? How can you make sure that all the people that he has power over, he can't use their sex and sexual favors as a way to get ahead, okay? The third is we protect people with professional licenses. So as an attorney, you all are attorneys, that if you all have sex with your client, that's a great way to lose your license. That would be two things: commingle funds and sex with a client. Right? You have these groups called, like, in your bar association, somebody who deals with counseling, the medical associations, a teaching association. You'll lose your teaching license. You'll lose your professional license if you engage in sexual misconduct. Okay? So imagine sports didn't do any of this. They didn't see that they were dealing with children. Number two, and they didn't pass any rules that, like, how would you normally protect children? Coaches are regularly alone with children as a matter of course. There was no Title IX like protection. There was no entity. If somebody was abused, there was nobody to sue. There was nothing. Like most teams rent their facilities. There are no assets to go after. There's very little insurance. USA Swimming, for most of its lifetime, had $100,000 of a wasting policy, which means defense fees come off the top, which meant that by the time that the plaintiff could get any money, there really was nothing they could get. So they recognized that this just isn't a place that I can help you. I can't do much for you here, right? But there was no responsibility on the part of the national governing body, USA Swimming or whatever sport, and the United States Olympic Committee, and that was a very strategic decision. They worked very hard to maintain this idea of no legal duty. It's not our job. So we do tell schools, it is your responsibility to take care of students who suffer from sexual violence, and the USOC was just exactly the opposite. Nope, we don't do that, okay? And then professional license, unlike all these other professions that I've mentioned, coaching requires none. Did not require a background check, did not require nothing. Anybody can walk in and go be a coach and coach children. And most parents have no idea the difference between a coach who works at a school and a coach that works in the Olympic movement. Okay? And if they did violate some norm, there was no entity that was getting them out of coaching. The way that they would, if they were at a school, they would have been out of, okay? Believe it or not, right now, there is a big pushback on how it is that we have this new entity called the United States Center for Safe Sport. And they are sort of like an HR department or like a Title IX office, right? Or like a licensing agency. And somebody has a complaint, this is where they go. And if they need help, this right, so you make a complaint there. And they're supposed to do the investigation and the harm. And you think like, well, who would be against this? I think who's against it is these coaches who own the clubs or the club owners who are accustomed to having no oversight. A coach at a school is used to having layers on top of them, used to having an athletic director and a Title IX officer and an SWA and a general counsel position, right? They're used to having people, right? Imagine in the Olympic movement, if you own a club, there's nobody on top of you overseeing what. Okay? And if you can get kids to come, you're in. So not only are athletes normally set up to be abused, the normal protections that we have are not there to be able to protect them. And the story only gets worse. Okay. Okay. So, starting in 2010, I tend to be a little optimistic, and sometimes it gets me in trouble. And because I thought that because I was an Olympian and I grew up in Olympic sports, and I had been doing this work for so long with schools, I thought the Olympic Committee just doesn't know how bad it is. I will be the savior of them. Right, and that's a knee slapper because they knew exactly what the situation was, and they didn't. It took me a while to realize, you're not going to do anything, right? So I was furiously writing policies and making suggestions and getting other people to agree with getting all these other either youth serving organizations or other people and experts in child abuse to agree with me, right? So it wasn't just me, it was all these other groups as well. And no, they were not going to change. So within the Olympic Committee, how many of you all know, I'm sure you don't, how many of you all know that the Olympic movement is governed by a statute? The long name is the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act. So how many of you all know that it is governed by a statute? Yeah. Carmen Davies here, Olympic champion in rowing. So she knows, okay, so it's a statute that governs what the relationship is between athletes and administrators and how they're governed. It gives the Olympic Committee, you, Congress says, get to use those marks, you get to raise money with those marks. In exchange, you're responsible for overseeing the Olympic movement. Okay? Part of that was athletes were supposed to get 20% of all the board spots and committee spots. An athlete is defined pretty narrowly as somebody within 10 years post-competition. So you're talking about typically somebody under the age of 35. Karen's case, not quite so much. Yeah. She just kept right on rowing. But rather than having the USOC do the job of letting sport wasn't complying with the Sports Act, rather than having the USOC say, hey, you need to get your house in order, you need to comply, they made the athlete do it. Okay, so there was this remedy for athletes to be able to do it under the Sports Act. It's called a Section 9 complaint. It's an individual. A Section 10 complaint is a big group of you, and you want to get the national governing body disbarred, essentially. We're going to blow you up. Or sometimes another group will come in and say, we can do this better. But rather than having the USOC do it, which is very contentious, you can imagine, right? People, they want to be friends with each other. They want to be collaborative. They did not want to be hostile or, be in a position of being the police. They didn't want to be the watchdog. Okay? So they required athletes to do it. The USOC funds the defense fees for the national governing bodies, for the sport. It did not fund the attorney's fees for the athletes. In every other case you all know, whether it's contracts or torts or other kinds of cases, there are attorney's fees provisions. Okay, there's a way for attorneys to be able to get. Not true with the Sports Act. So athletes who brought these cases either had to get pro bono help or they needed to be independently wealthy. Because no attorney really can, a Section 10 complaint is a year-long process. It's a $250,000 easy complaint. So, and how well did the administrators, who they were dependent on to be able to make the team, knew the people who were against them? What were their chances of actually making the team after they bring this hostile complaint? Right? You can see the tension that's going on there. So when I brought this up, after many, many cases, I tried to get the Sports Act. I made a provision here, we need to change the statute so that attorneys get to be paid for. We need to change some of these dynamics here. The USOC was having none of it. Okay, that's a terrible slide. I know you can't see it. I'll just tell you what it says. Okay. So what it says is that this is from the pleadings that are going on right now with the Larry. Okay? It says plaintiffs' negligence-based claims fail as a matter of law because USA Gymnastics did not have a legal duty to the plaintiffs. Okay, so Allie Reisman, right, like that, we don't owe them a legal duty. USAG had no legal duty to prevent plaintiffs from Nassar's criminal conduct going back to Michigan State. Okay, this is what they're arguing right now. This is why we needed to have the statute. Last part is USAG had no duty to warn MSU, Twistars, or other aggrieved parties about Nassar. Right? Yeah, I think it's pretty deplorable. So, I did start in 2010. I won't get into the long list of things that I've done, but nothing would have happened. No statute would have gotten passed if it had not been for these incredible Nassar survivors. They had not spoken up the way they did. I don't think ever in history we've had a time where people have been sexually assaulted and they spoke one after the other on national television that was live streamed, that you could videotape it, you could download it, you could watch it anytime. It was amazing. And it changed the game. And I have to tell you all, the only thing that's different about this perpetrator, as opposed to all the other cases of sexual abuse in sport, is the scale. It's only the scale is different. They actually estimated he probably abused 2,000 or 3,000 students. It's 20 years, right? But he used those 5 rings to work as a volunteer to be able to have access to victims. So if they had just been bumbling along at 40, 50 cases a year, then we were not going to see any change. It took an earthquake. It took this combination of having some of the best athletes in the world, some of the most articulate athletes in the world, and having a judge be able to let them be able to speak on national television, being able to, we didn't have this ability to have something live streamed just a few years ago. So all the combination of all those things was hugely important to having the change happen, having Congress be able to take a look at it. All right, so we get the Safe Sport Up passed. Okay, so, and again, you don't think it's a big deal because you're like, well, duh. So they now have a legal duty to protect athletes from physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Everybody's a mandatory reporter to 2 places, both the U.S. Center for Safe Sport and the police. Children cannot be alone with an adult member unless it's an emergency, and it establishes this new entity, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. Safe Sport has now been open for just over 2 years. Okay, so think of a number in your head. How many complaints do you think that they've had? How many complaints? 2,000. 2,000. Now imagine a Title IX office, a DA's office, a HR department handling 2,000 complaints. Right? I always knew it was this big. You're in coaching. This is Debbie Carlson, aka the fearless coach, Debbie Carlson. I've done it before. My good friend. 3-time national team coach in Division I rugby, 3-time national champion. I mean, that's unbelievable. Would you have guessed they would have 2,000 complaints?
Would I have?
Would you have thought? Yeah.
Yes, because I know you, but.
but you see it. You see other coaches and how they abuse and how they can extract sexual favor, being on a better position on the team, making the team, being a starter, getting a scholarship, right? Right? So people who are in sport are not that surprised. Okay.
Nancy, can you just say? How are they dealing with it?
Yeah, so Congress gave them money, but right now, the money that they gave them is only for the educational part of it. And I'm dealing with a couple cases right now where there's been none. There has been no education. But the part that they need the most help with, of course, is resolving these 2,000 complaints. I mean, you figure each one has got to be a minimum of 200 hours, right? If you're going to do an investigation and have a hearing and call in witnesses and, right? I mean, it's not a small thing. Right now, the USOC is funding it. They've got a little bit of outside funding. But it's kind of like, again, a business's HR department. Would a business want to pay for its HR department to resolve their sexual harassment complaints? No, they do not want to do this. Do schools want to have a Title IX office as part of being in a school? No, they do not want it. They want it to be somebody else's job. Let the police do it. Let the clubs do it. Let the parents take care of it, right? They want other people to handle it. But what we as a society are saying is not just in employment, not just in schooling, but also sports, is we are requiring the powers that be to handle that. If they're making $425 million a year, I have no problem requiring them to spend millions of dollars to go not just address these complaints, but to change the culture of sport. The culture of sport is coaches date their athletes. And that's how it's phrased. It's not phrased as coaches molest their athletes. But it's saying they're having a relationship, that this is true love. When my coach, Mitch Ivey, from the 1984 Olympics, is on the banned list. And he molested and then married 3 of his swimmers. He molested a lot more than that, but he married 3 of them, the total of which did not equal 1 year. So the marriage just validated, see, she's 18 years old, you were having a relationship. She was underage, but that's just a technicality. So when the 12-year-old, remember I was on the national team at age 12, the 12-year-old sees the 18-year-old with a relationship with the coach, they think that when they're kissed by their coach, that this is true love. I've got a parent right now who said, look, I've never had a 16-year-old before, and what I saw was that my child was happy. She was smiling. You all, meaning the club where she came from, have seen thousands of 16-year-olds, and you knew exactly what was going on, and you didn't stop it. So until we change this culture, I've been saying forever and ever to the Olympic Committee, to every national governing body, that the number 1 rule that needs to happen is coaches shall not have romantic and sexual relationship with the athletes they coach, regardless of age or consent. It's no different from being a boss or an attorney or any of these other professions. Okay? Yeah. No. But there is a duty. There's no duty on the victim to report, but there is a duty on other people to report. Okay? But still, the reason why they don't report, right? There's a case going on in North Carolina right now. Is because, again, like the girlfriend is jealous of the 14-year-old, because the 14-year-old's having this sexual relationship with her boyfriend, right? That's how they think about it. They don't think about it in terms of bright line rules and changing this dynamic. You just don't see this in other areas, okay? All right. So the passage of the statute is the beginning. We've got to absolutely change the culture. There have been 2 major reports that have come out. One is called the Borders Commission, and the other one is called, the Borders Commission is underway right now. One is called Ropes and Gray, the other one is called the House Subcommittee. Both of them were damning on USOC, saying athletes were knocking at your door, saying, please help me. And USOC's official position was, you go get help from your national governing body. But they're the ones that are doing it. And they would not help the athletes. So We have, it's kind of like, when Lisa Simpson was raped by football recruits at the appellate court said that the school had a quote-unquote official policy to show their recruits a good time, usually meaning sex and drugs. Okay. And that policy created a risk of harm to women on campus. And so they didn't do any training in the first place, right? So normally, it's kind of hard to sue under Title IX. You've got to show that somebody in position that had actual knowledge and that they remained deliberately indifferent about it. The court here said, no, first time it happens, if you had this official policy, well, do you think there was an official policy written down anywhere that said, show them a good time? What the Ropes and Gray report in particular showed was that the USOC's official policies created risk of harm to athletes. So it wasn't written down like, ignore those complaints of sexual abuse, but they certainly knew over and over that there were lots and lots of complaints of athletes who were begging for help. Okay, so what we're doing right now, what we're right in the middle of, is we're trying to get changes to the Sports Act, that statute that governs the Olympic movement, and trying to get athletes to be able to have more power within the movement. Okay, so these are all things that instead of having 20% of the power, that they would have 50% of the voting power. Because you better believe if athletes have 50% of the voting power, they're going to restructure how money gets spent. Okay, they're going to say athlete wellness is an important factor in protecting us. Okay, all right. This is an issue that's very, very near and dear to my heart. Okay, when I was in college, my sophomore year in college, I was raped when I was out running in between. Duke has two campuses, East and West, and I was out running between there. Who can spot the victim blaming in this article? Running along. Oh, running along. Really? I'm supposed to have a posse when I go run? The place I was running, we called it the social run because, like, you typically saw all your friends going back and forth. It's the first day of Thanksgiving, so what was normally quite populated now was not. So I had to be in town to go train, and whereas most of my peers were home. I can't tell you how much this impacted my life for quite a while. This is what I looked like when I was raped. I was that strong, and I couldn't get away. And he didn't have a weapon. So it really reshaped my views of, I thought that if I was good, that good things would happen to me. And I just couldn't understand how being grabbed, fighting in the woods for about 20 minutes, and then getting raped for over 2 hours, the whole thing was about 2.5 hours, how that didn't jive with what I thought, like, how humanity was based. Like, how could something so awful? I felt forsaken by God. I thought, like, you know, if God loves me, good things will happen to me. And I got a wonderful case of PTSD. What helps a victim? Okay, so the name of this conference is called Believe, and I can't tell you how important it was for me that people believed that it happened. Okay, so nobody said, like, really, right? And I didn't have to, like, go through. Okay, so I went directly from there to the police station where they could not have been nicer to me. Do you know why they were nice to me? Because of the work that people did for years to get rape victims to be able to be believed. So not just that it happened, but also the depth of the emotional harm. This is where I see a lot of where kind of the things fall through for victims is that they believe that it happened, but it's like, come on, get over it. Well, you know, right? And you could tell a story of, well, look at Nancy Hogshead. She was raped, had a terrible case of PTSD, and then she went on to go win 3 gold medals in the Olympics 2.5 years later. You could tell that story. Please, dear God, do not, because that's not the story. The story is I was unusually helped because I was raped in this very narrow definition of rape. So I didn't know him, I hadn't been flirting, I hadn't been drinking. So because of all those things, I got what everybody is supposed to get. The worst mistake I've ever made in my entire life, if I could take one thing back in my entire life, dramatic pause, is I would take back the talking to that I gave myself in the hospital where I said, Nancy, you are not going to let this get you down. You are not going to let this affect you. You are going to keep going and you're going to have a great life and this is not going to affect you. And boy, oh boy, was that ever a mistake. Because it didn't allow me to be human. It didn't allow me to heal. It didn't allow me to be vulnerable and tell other people that I desperately needed help. It really sort of took the knees right out from under me. So what does PTSD look like from the outside? What could people see? One is I had a lot of interruptive thoughts, and crazy things that would never happen, and I knew they would never happen, but they scared the shit out of me anyway. So one of the things, like I would be sitting in a room like this, and I would imagine suddenly that a group of guys came in with machine guns and said, "We want Nancy." And right now, that's not going to happen, right? But it didn't matter. It scared me, and so I would have these weird thoughts like that. So I was raped in cold night air, just the inability to be there, which meant like I either had to be with a group of people when I went back from the library, or I just would study in my room, just to make sure that I was not outside in cold night air. Forget about sleep. I mean, just like I would close my eyes and bing, I'd be like right back there in the woods. And then I was doing this kind of crazy behavior that I knew was crazy at the time, but I was embarrassed that it was crazy, which was I'd be lying in bed and I would go and check the lock to see if it was locked. And I could see through the light whether or not the deadbolt was there, and it was locked. Okay, so then I would go back to bed. And then, 20 minutes later, I would have this urge to just make sure the door was locked. Okay, and so I would do this again and again. Now, after a week of this, only 1 week of this, the door is locked, right? I knew the door was locked. So now I'm lying in bed going, Nancy, the door is locked. It's fine. Just lie down here and get to sleep. It's locked. And I couldn't help it. I would still have to go, right? So now I know that's bananas, that you have to keep getting up and going to see the lock. But again, I was embarrassed to tell somebody else that I was having the crazy thoughts because it's not who I wanted to be able to muscle through it. I wanted to be able to heal like that. So what does PTSD feel like on the inside is just chronically unsafe. It would not have mattered if I had been surrounded by people with machine guns. I just still would not have felt safe. I was also fearful that the way that I felt now is how I was always going to feel. I went to the library and did all this research on rape. Now, what I was looking for was somebody who had been raped when they were young and who now had an awesome life, right? And who had a great family and who had a great job, and they were influential in the community and they were connected to other people. That's what I wanted. And all I found were people who felt just like me. It's like, I got that one. So it was like quite heat coming off the page, but I didn't find somebody, I didn't have a role model. I didn't know anybody who had been raped, who was a role model or somebody who could talk about it. And I really felt like it really impacted my relationship, my spiritual relationship with God. I really felt forsaken. I really felt like, I was sort of like the ground was taken out from me. So I really had to come up with this new spiritual relationship with God. It was not it was not a quick process. But this is really what I thought was at stake. And so about maybe 10 years ago, one of my mentors came to me and said, you need to start talking about this. I said, no, I'm much more comfortable being in the role of an expert. And he said, no, you need to be, because he'd heard me say how I wanted somebody who would come forward. And he's like, it needs to be, you've got to be one of the people, and you also have to make sure that the 1 in 4 women who are sitting out there who've also experienced sexual violence, that you let younger women know that it happened to you and how it is that you healed and what did you do for yourself that made it better. That those key things, we need to have women be able to acknowledge this. That is what the Me Too movement did. It's 1 in 4 women, and your average guy is perfectly able to say, that can't be true, because I only know one person who's ever been raped, okay? And my husband is an awesome guy. I mean, just a great, great guy. And so I asked him, I said, how many women have confided in you that they've been raped? He said 2. One of them. So, he's like an open guy. He's a sweetie. Right? But so it's easy for men in particular to think this never happens because they don't have any experience with it, because we're so ashamed that we don't tell somebody else that it is part of my life story. It is part of my life trajectory. We as women need to, that's what the Me Too movement did, was to let everybody know just how ubiquitous that sexual violence is in our lives. Sexual harassment, name calling, etc. Okay? So here's how I was crazy lucky. Duke was really good to me. One is I redshirted, so I didn't have to swim. So I got my full scholarship, and they took the burden of having to be in the water 4 hours a day, another hour of weights off me. Right away, they just dropped 2 classes. Normally on my transcript, that would be WF, because it was late in the semester. And it doesn't say anything. It's like they never happened, just as I just took 2 classes right then. Then I was living in a place where I'd have to walk through woods in order to be able to get to main campus. And they moved me to like the most desirable campus on housing where everybody wants to live. Believe me, there were no single dorms that were like randomly available. I don't know how they did it, but they gave me a single dorm in the most desirable place to live, which is also like where most people are, where I felt more comfortable. And they gave me counseling. And then the last one is a good example of, so I went to the police station to pay a stack of tickets. Now, remember, I know everybody there now because you've got to go a lot after you're raped, and you got to go sketches and books. And they said, Nancy, why do you have all these tickets? And I said, well, because if you don't make the major parking lot, you have to park in a lot we call Guam. And it was, I just couldn't walk from there over to my dorm room. And they said, So I didn't have to pay the tickets, number one. Number two is they gave me a special parking pass that let me park pretty much wherever I wanted to, increasing my popularity dramatically. Right? So these are the kind of accommodations. When I think of my clients and what schools do to them, typically they add on. So they say, oh, not only do you have your classes, but now you also need to go to counseling. Oh, you hurt your back when you were raped? Oh, so you also need to go to physical therapy. Oh, and you also, you have all these rights. And then they won't let them get out of their sport. Or alternatively, they yank their sport. And this is the person's sense of belonging, their sense of team, their sense of, where they put their most time into. Like some people desperately need to stay part of the team. Some people really need a break. So I look at like what I see other schools doing, and it's like they almost want to punish the kid having been assaulted. I was really, really lucky, and sort of, if you tell the story, the story is that I got some of the best help that there is immediately, and was really helped. Another wonderful thing is that in the water, one of the things, if you've all read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, one of the ways that people heal from PTSD when their brain is like lit up is hard physical exercise. So not only was I, after I left, when I came back to swimming, not only was I doing exactly what they would say, but also I found that under the water, I could heal. I could be really angry under the water and not have to worry about being socially unacceptable, right? But I could cry under the water. I mean, as long as I could breathe, like, But I could do it over and over again. So, and what I learned afterwards, what therapists will say to do is come up with a different ending of what happened to you in your mind. So I didn't know that, but all I did was I just imagined the same thing. I would see the guy, but this time I had a machete, and we're talking, and right, and I was slicing off testicles, and I was right, like blood was going everywhere, and I was loving every second of it. And right, so and I did this over and over and over again. Right? And so it forms the sense of empowerment and sort of helps people be able to recover. So, so with, right now, again, the reason why I come forward is my mentor said, you need to come forward. And I'm telling you all right now, if you have that secret, you need to tell particularly younger women so that they know that there is a path for them. They don't think that their life is gone. They don't think that their life is ruined. Amazing, amazing women who are sitting here right now have the same story and need to be able to share it. If we harness it the right way, we can make this amazing difference for women in the world. I really hope to be able to make an amazing difference for both men and women who are sexually abused within the Olympic movement. And it is an extreme pleasure to get to tell all of you about it. Thank you all very much.
We have time for one or two questions, and then we're going to have a quick break out here, and you can ask Nancy some further questions during that. But Nancy, will you address the questions too?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Betsy Fox.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
What do you advise your clients to do now that the administrative process?
Right. So those of
Repeat
you
the
who
question. Yeah, we couldn't hear.
Yeah, I'll repeat. So those of you who are lawyers know that typically you can go, we have two routes to be able to go. One is to be able to go to the Department of Education, who is essentially like the police that oversees education to make sure that they're following Title IX. Okay, so it's their job to do the enforcing. Remember when you went to 7th grade and the legislature passes the laws, the courts interpret the laws, and the administration is supposed to enforce the law. So the Department of Education is supposed to be enforcing Title IX. And with Betsy DeVos, I don't trust anything that she's doing right now. I want her to stay as far away from athletics as she possibly can. But here's the thing: when it comes to Title IX, as opposed to Title VII, is you don't have to go through any administrative agency. If you're sex discriminated in employment, you have to first go through the EEOC. Not true with Title IX. You can go and sue directly in court. Again, it depends on which court you get. If you don't get if you're not in a good court, if you're not in a good circuit, it's like another way that we're kind of like weathering the storm of like hanging on until Trump gets out.
All Duke's basketball jokes aside, do you ever wonder, quickly framed, I think anyone, to hear how Duke treated you, particularly, in the early 1980s, is wonderful but surprising. And do you ever kind of play through your head, what if it had been a basketball player?
Absolutely. The reason why I got treated so well, I don't think it's like any special characteristic about me. My rapist had no power. My rapist was not a student, was not a professor, was not a basketball player, he had no power. He was, he had a very thick urban accent. My guess is he was not a student. He smelled bad. And he was crazy. He kept trying to pretend that this was a date. It was cuckoo. And so like nobody was on his side. Everybody was on my side. If he had been a Bill Cosby, if he had been a basketball player, absolutely. You know, we know where the risk of harm to women are men in all male groups. So whether it's the military, like the military groups on campus, whether it's fraternities, whether it's all male sports teams. So Rock Turner notwithstanding, most swimmers and track and field athletes and with teams that work out together, men and women, you know, they have a respect for each other and they have to. You can't think that women are sort of less than if you're working out with them. You find lower rates of sexual assault, right? So here's your average person who's in campus. Men in all male groups are way up here. So, yeah, no, I absolutely. I would like to think Duke would be different, but no. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think we would get to see that, like, did? Are these people obviously indifferent to what happened? And
yeah, so out of the Ropes and Gray report, only one person got fired. Okay, Alan Ashley got fired, and as far as I can tell, things are like there's like some cosmetic changes. Like now they hired another person to be head of athlete services, but in terms of like I just finished reading or helping write an athlete's narrative about the story of their career. This is one of the best athletes in the world ever, 4-time Olympian, amazing athlete, and the story, she wasn't sexually assaulted, but the story that you hear is essentially, you know, she had no power, right? They were willing to yank her money and her, right? And she lived so precariously financially. Her stipend a month was $1,600 a month. I mean, most of the executives are making not just over 100,000, but, you know, like, you know, 1.2 million. They've got these crazy expense accounts on top of having these really, really high salaries. And some of them actually complained to her, like, can you believe that people don't think that we earn our money? And meanwhile, like I talked to Allie Rison's mom, who said most of her career she made $1,000 a month. And right, so the division of just money alone is who gets paid and who doesn't get paid. Is crazy case.
I'm going to stop us right there. You can ask questions during the break. Could we have one other really? A few more hours. We're going to watch our next panel, but quickly do a break, get another coffee, and then come right back here. We're going to shoot for like 5 minutes, everybody.